Last month, OpenAI shocked the world when they announced a $300 billion deal buying new technology from Oracle. Ignoring the fact that OpenAI only earns about 3% of that, this caused Oracle's stock to jump 30% overnight, as they revealed they used that money to buy computer chips from Nvidia, who then in turn pledged to invest that $100 billion right back into OpenAI. Meanwhile, OpenAI is also buying chips from AMD, a company who also sends billions to Oracle each year to use its data centers. If that sounds confusing, it's because it is. Nearly $1 trillion has now been recycled through the same four companies, inflating valuations, creating shareholder value, and in theory, growing the economy. But back in the real world, the picture looks very different. The US just posted its weakest job report numbers in years. Business spending has just nosedived, and Google searches for "I need help with my mortgage" just hit an all-time high. This all begs the question: when did America's economy stop being about creating value and start becoming a giant Ponzi scheme between a few big tech firms? And what happens when this bubble inevitably bursts? Everyone from Elon Musk to even Sam Altman has warned that things might be moving a little too quickly. A lot of that hype is down to AI, which isn't exactly anything new. But what we're seeing now is increasingly less to do with AI and more about the kind of growth we've come to celebrate. The endless pursuit of economic growth has come under a lot of criticism in recent years, but as a general metric for success of an economy, it's actually pretty good. In theory, economic growth happens when people become more productive, meaning they can produce more with less. That's what allows people to work fewer hours while still earning the same wages, which is exactly what's been happening for the past 100 years or so. That all sounds pretty good. The only problem is that there's also another way the economy can grow, and that's by firms just spending more and more money. There's an old joke in economics where two grad students pay each other $100 to eat cow. At the end, they both still have the same amount of money and are covered in filth, but they still proudly proclaim to have created 2 new jobs and raised the GDP by $200. While that might be an overly visual scenario, it's actually a pretty good example of the bad kind of growth that still gets registered and given so much airtime in headline statistics. The point is, economic growth is either generated through doing more with less or by simply spending more. And the thing is, almost all the growth that we're seeing today comes from the second kind. AI companies are burning through billions of dollars training massive large language models, building data centers, and hiring armies of engineers, all of which technically add to GDP, despite real wages for most workers barely moving. At the same time, the valuation of these companies has completely exploded. Since 2024, the US stock market has jumped more than 35%, but almost entirely thanks to a handful of tech giants like Nvidia, Microsoft, and Apple. Of course, this is all based on the expectation that AI will, at some point, actually help the real economy. The problem is, as time goes on, more and more examples are emerging of AI systems completely failing to deliver on their promises. One of the earliest and most expensive came from IBM Watson Health Initiative. It was pitched as a revolutionary way to integrate AI into healthcare, from helping diagnose cancer to personalized treatment plans for patients. But it routinely gave inaccurate and even dangerous advice, at one point suggesting aggressive cancer treatments for what turned out to be just a mole. To nobody's surprise, the project was eventually scrapped, but not after burning a $4 billion hole in the company's books. And this isn't exactly a one-off. A study from MIT also found that 95% of AI programs failed to deliver any extra profits at all. All of that raises an obvious question. Why hasn't the market come back down to the reality that we're all seeing? Well, it might just be a matter of time. During the dot-com boom, the Nasdaq rose over 400% and stayed at that level for a couple of years, before finally crashing nearly 80%. Now, that could be what's happening here, but the longer this goes on, the more it starts to look like there's another explanation entirely, one that's less about market hype and more about a careful, deliberate rigging of the system itself. Take a look at this diagram. Each circle is a company, and each arrow is money or services changing hands. The bigger the circle, the more money they have. You've probably already noticed something a bit strange. All the money seems to be flowing in a loop. OpenAI spends hundreds of billions on a company like Oracle for access to their cloud services. Oracle then takes that cash and buys tens of thousands of chips from Nvidia, who then invests that money straight back into OpenAI, boosting its valuation so it can raise even more money from investors. The entire AI ecosystem is built around these kind of feedback loops. Even the smaller labs like xAI, Mistral, and Figure do the same thing. Raise money, buy chips, rent cloud space, then use those numbers to raise even more money from the very companies they were buying their products from. Each round of spending pushes valuations higher because every transaction looks like growth, even if there's no underlying productivity gains to show for it. A few months ago, Nvidia became the biggest company in the world, outgrowing Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft in just a few years. OpenAI is on track to become the fastest growing startup in history, reportedly valued at more than $150 billion, despite still technically losing money every year. While it might sound pretty sketchy that these companies are just trading the same dollar back and forth and calling it value creation, that's actually how a lot of the economy already functions. In a small town with just 3 businesses, a supermarket, a barber, and a pub, the barber buys groceries, the shop owner drinks at the pub, and the pub owner gets his haircut. All of that money is still technically flowing around in a circle, but as long as the people are spending money on products they find valuable, the system actually makes a lot of sense. But there is one crucial difference between this seemingly functional economy and the AI circle jerk we now find ourselves in. In the real economy, spending is driven by money that people actually have and on products that they actually find valuable. But in the AI ecosystem, firms are spending money they don't have on products which aren't actually valuable, at least for now. Oracle, one of the largest AI firms in the world, has a debt-to-equity ratio that just exploded past 500%, meaning it's borrowed $5 for every dollar it actually owns. US corporate debt has also now surged to record levels, hitting $13 trillion for the first time. A huge chunk of that borrowing has gone towards AI infrastructure and chip investment, all based on the expectation that this spending will eventually translate into real productivity gains. It's hard to overstate just how dependent the US economy has become on this industry to keep growing. Since 2025, it's estimated that over 92% of growth came from AI spending alone, and if just one of these companies were to collapse, investors would likely panic, pulling their money out of overvalued firms. As the cash flows dry up, thousands of AI startups would be forced to close shop, sending ripples through the entire US economy. The obvious starting point for this incredibly risky circular economy is the launch of ChatGPT in late 2022. Almost overnight, Wall Street became obsessed with the idea of building the first true artificial general intelligence. They knew that whoever reached it first wouldn't just dominate the tech industry, they'd own the most powerful, profitable technology ever created, so money started flowing into the system. In 2024 alone, global AI investment topped $130 billion, more than the worldwide spend on renewable energy. The assumption was that with enough cash to burn, these companies would continue to work out ways to improve their models, eventually creating AGI. The thing is, that doesn't seem to be happening. Sure, models have improved, but mostly through brute force. The compute power used to train them has increased 20-fold since launch, and it's still a long way from creating a super intelligence. Given that, you might think it would make sense for companies to take a step back. Instead of burning through billions every year chasing AGI, they could focus on something more simpler, making their existing models actually profitable. After all, consumers have been using this insanely powerful technology for free for more than 3 years now. But these companies might not have that choice. They've become so reliant on debt and investor hype that if expectations about future tech were to dip and investors starting pulling their money out, the entire system would collapse. So rather than slowing down, they're doing the exact opposite, pushing the narrative that the next big breakthrough is just around the corner. This illusion is helped massively by the fact that these companies now control nearly everyone who actually understands AI. The best researchers and engineers have already been recruited by the biggest firms, leaving almost no independent voices outside their walls to challenge the claims these companies make. And that's where the whole thing really starts to look like a bit of a Ponzi scheme. It's less the fact that there are tens of billions of dollars flowing around the same few companies, but more the fact that if any of this were to stop, the entire system would implode. Sure, it's possible that there will be a genuine breakthrough, some game-changing discovery that finally justifies all of this spending, but if that doesn't happen, the whole thing is eventually set to implode. And if that were to happen, it likely wouldn't be the people responsible who foot the bill. Top CEOs and executives have already secured multi-million-dollar payouts. Just look at Sam Altman riding around in a car worth over $10 million. And even if the companies they've set up go bust, they'll still be walking away multi-millionaires. At the same time, the costs to the wider economy would be enormous. A collapse in AI valuations would ripple through the stock market, wiping off trillions from pension funds, retirement accounts, and savings tied to tech. When that happens, the government would almost certainly have to step in, just like it did in 2008, pumping money into the system to stabilize markets, bail out critical firms, and prevent a wider crash. In the face of preventing a massive recession, this might seem justified, but it also causes some major issues. For starters, bailouts are incredibly expensive. They generally mean the public ends up paying for the mistakes of the world's wealthiest investors, people who took massive risks with other people's money and walked away untouched when it collapsed. That of course raises some pretty big questions about how fair the system actually is. But there's actually a much bigger issue that they create. It's something economists refer to as a moral hazard, and it helps to explain why the economy keeps growing through these same destructive cycles over and over again. The basic idea is that once the government has stepped in to save a failing corporation, investors start to assume that it will happen again. Because of this, they become willing to make far riskier bets, because they know that when it all goes wrong, they won't be the ones paying the price. So the economy ends up stuck in this repeating pattern. Investors pile into whatever the next big thing is. The bubble bursts, the government then bails them out, and the whole process starts over again. In theory, a capitalist system works by rewarding effective businesses with profits and punishing bad businesses by forcing them to go bankrupt. But if you remove the second part of that equation, the system starts to fall apart. Decades of bailouts and regulations have created a system in which the biggest firms are accepted as simply too big to fail. With this AI cycle, the latest iteration of that reality. Of course, for now people aren't really thinking about that. The focus is, rightly, on whether AGI is actually going to happen or not. There's a chance we'll look back on this moment as the messy, expensive birth of a genuinely transformative technology, one that really does change how the economy works. But if not, this crippling cycle of corporate exuberance and public bailouts might be set to continue, with ordinary people left to foot the bill.